And have an extremely exciting session for us here today with a gentleman that I've been following for a very long time, many years now, at least since 2008. And we're going to cover a topic that we have really yet to cover here over the last year or so, which is deflation. And we've talked a lot about what happens during inflation and strategies that can be used during those types of periods, but what happens when the opposite happens. And by the time you're watching this video, you've already had an introduction to Chris. You already know what his work is about. There's a good chance you've already either read his book or seen his videos. And I don't know about you, but if you have a chance to watch the crash course or to read it, it's a little freaky. But at the same time, it makes perfect sense. And it really is painting, I think, a very realistic picture of reality and the challenges we're going to be facing in the coming years. So the focus is for the Elevation Group, how do we turn these challenges and these events into opportunity? And that's what this call is today about. We're going to be looking at how we turn periods of peak energy and periods of massive economic deflation into opportunity. And who better out there in the world than the man himself, Dr. Chris Martenson. So thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. It's a real honor to be here.
Fantastic. Well, Chris, I would love it if you could take a couple of minutes to talk about current events, because this past week or two in Europe has been quite exciting. From the time I've been following your work, there's only, I believe, 2 times that I've seen you ever issue any kind of alert. That's not something that you do lightly. And the first time was around Fukushima that I remember, and the second time was last week around the euro. And I would love your insights on what's happening there and what you think is going to take place over the next, coming months.
I'd be happy to do that. You know, you mentioned the Fukushima alert, and just so your listeners know, my approach is to let the data do the talking. And sometimes in this world, you have to read between the lines, because what we're fed or what we're allowed to see is not always the complete story. So there's a quick story around Fukushima. What we did there is we have people on our site who happen to be former nuclear engineers on subs and things like that, and we decided to analyze the data for ourselves. We were looking at things like the quality of that explosion of reactor number 3, which was clearly not a hydrogen explosion. It was something much more exothermic than that. We were looking at the likely spread of radionuclides. We were just best we could, and we came up with a set of conclusions about what had happened there and about the severity of that particular event. And I sent out a very specific warning to people in Japan that they needed to be ready for much higher levels of radiation than were being admitted to. Sadly, all of that turned out to be spot on, and we were absolutely correct about the idea that meltdowns had occurred, et cetera, and so forth. And I raised that because this is what we're doing with Europe right now as well, is reading between the lines and trying to understand what's going on, given very incomplete information. And do send out alerts very rarely. The quality of my alerts is this. An alert has to be something that it's information that would personally cause me to take action. And if it meets that test, then I will send it out. And the actions in this case around Europe, what I saw there was looking at the situation of the banks, looking at how unsolvable it all is, taking a peek at what was happening with credit default spreads, looking at what was really happening in the bond markets, what I thought liquidity flows were telling us, all of which summarized into this idea that there was now an unacceptable chance that the banking system in Europe could experience a systemic failure. Much like one that almost happened in October of 2008. We found out after the fact. Mervyn King, then head of the Bank of England, said, "Oof, we were hours away from a complete shutdown of our banking system over here." Obviously, that would have spread because of the interlinked nature of the banking system. And so the opportunity that I saw in that was for people to protect themselves, particularly people in Europe who happen to be my subscribers, to go down to the bank and get some cash out that would basically cover a few months of living expenses in the event that the banking system suffered a seizure. And by seizure, what I'm really worried about there is the idea that one bank suddenly can't, maybe it's PNB Paribas or somebody, some French, German, Spanish bank, suddenly can't operate because it's insolvent. It's now recognized as bankrupt. So their relationships in terms of interbank lending shut down with all of their counterparties, upstream and downstream. they now, all these counterparties have an issue and they have to suspend operations, and next thing you know, the whole thing freezes. And then you have concerns like, do credit cards work in that environment? Do ATMs dispense cash? Do debit cards work? We don't know. It's never been stress tested. And so when I see a set of conditions that suddenly I see a highly unacceptable risk to normal smooth functioning, I say, is there anything simple here we can do to protect ourselves? And the answer is sure. You can take some cash out of the bank, and that was the basis of my alert. And just so listeners here know, my style is not to say there will be a banking shutdown. Be ready for that. I'm saying I think what I categorized it as is somewhere around maybe a 10% chance over the next 6 months that happens. And my style is to say, well, if I was going to go for an elective surgical procedure where I had a 10% chance of something really horrible happening, would I do it? And the answer is probably no. And so here we have a situation where we can elect to either keep our money in a banking system that may or may not be operable or not, and in some cases it makes sense to remove some of our assets out of that system. If I'm in Greece, do I have money in the bank there? Absolutely not. Italy? Probably not. Spain? Nope. Portugal? No way. So if I'm in any of those countries, and quite a few people are, I'm very seriously thinking about ways to make and render my wealth safe from what I consider to be a highly troubled banking system. And so this is not the kind of view that you're really going to read in the newspaper. You're never going to catch the G20 telling you there's a risk to the banking system. You have to really read between the lines. You have to talk to people who don't have a vested interest in preserving the euro or seeing the euro fail. I have no vested interest in this besides helping people understand what's transpiring and why, and ways that we might either sidestep pain that other people will experience, or more importantly, see the opportunities that exist in this story, because there are actually enormous opportunities. But first you have to understand what the real risks are and get yourself out of the old story and see what the new story might be.
Well, that's what I'm most interested in, is the opportunity side of things, and I would love to dovetail into that now that you bring it up. We can start specifically with Europe if you have some ideas around that, and then we'll move on to more of the big global macroeconomic picture for the next 20 years and how energy crosses into that.
Good. Well, actually, if we could start there, because I kind of like to start wide and narrow down.
Yeah. No. Great.
Okay. Great. So none of what's happening in Europe is at all surprising to me. This is something that I wrote about. Would be exactly what we would be seeing several years ago. I think 2006 was the first time I sort of articulated what was going to happen. And it starts with this idea that really energy is the master resource. I mean, if you have energy, you can have other commodities. And if you have other commodities, you can turn those into, I don't know, air conditioners and iPads and things like that, or, and then build derivative products off of all of that. That is to say, energy is the primary resource. And there's a huge story developing there, which has been quietly developing out of sight, at least for the United States. There are many other countries in the world that are much further along this understanding curve than we happen to be here in general. And the story is simply this: it's not that we're running out of energy. It's that every unit of energy we are now extracting is more costly than they used to be. Whether we're talking about the tar sands in Canada or the Orinoco Belt in Venezuela or the deep water finds, all of these things, when you look at the machinery, the capital involved, the physical capital or the monetary capital involved in prosecuting these new finds, you can just squint at it without being an expert and go, that looks more expensive than sticking a little straw into the ground and having this light, sweet stuff shoot out into the sky, and you have to worry about capping it. It's under such gorgeous pressure. It's a very different story, and so we could look at the capital cost, but the real story is the idea that it costs more energy to get that energy. And that's what we see reflected in these higher cost structures, right? Because money and energy, we can sort of relate them to each other. But the big story that's developing is this, is that the quality of the energy that we're now going after is declining. It just takes more energy to get energy. And because of that, we have less spare energy, if you will, less surplus energy in that equation to put into our economy. And so we just hold that one idea, which is verifiable, and I got mountains of facts. We can spend a lot of time going through the data, and people do. It's actually irrelevant because we can just see it very simply as a standalone idea. There's less net energy available for the world to do what it wants to do with. Well, what does the world want to do? Well, we wander over into the economic sphere, and it's very simple. The world wants to grow. It wants to grow jobs. It wants to grow economies. In fact, if you peer into this European situation, you will find that the only possible narrow avenue of solution that could possibly work is for Greece, is for Spain, is for Italy, is for Portugal to grow their economies very aggressively, to start burrowing out from under these mountains of debt.
Well,
So
yes.
growth, yeah, it's essential. So if we can have growth, well, it'll be great, and we can really grow through that. Did you have a question?
No, I was just going to say, all of the economic models, that have been sold to the middle class for their 40-year retirement plan are based on never-ending exponential growth.
Absolutely. If we have that growth, everything is fine.
Yeah.
And my whole body of work is around asking the question, what if that's not true?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so we might dedicate a portion of our assets, a portion of our portfolio to the idea that that is true, because it has been for a long time, and maybe it still will be. But I'm starting to ask the question, what if it's not true? And it turns out that without growth, the stock index funds in general are a disaster. They just won't work, and bond funds in general, in aggregate, just don't work because you need that growth. And so here we have this idea that we have energy is the primary thing by which we fuel both current economic activity and future growth. Requires growth, not just in energy, but that net energy thing I talked about. We wander over into the economic side, and we see nothing but exponential growth in debt, exponential growth in money, and exponential growth, and that's the system that's required for everything we know and love about investing, returns, how things are going to play out, what our real returns might be. All of those things have baked into them 40 to 50 years of this exponential growth in money and credit.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we say, well, wait. If growth in money and credit requires the future to be larger than the present, what's going to fund that growth? And we wander over to the energy side and we say, uh-oh, wait, where's the energy going to come from? And to my great surprise, exceedingly few people have connected those two dots and said, wait a minute. If we need growth in order for returns to be there for my pensions, for my endowments, for my retirement funds, whatever scale we're looking at this investing scenario, if you need growth to be there for those realities to come true for you, those dreams to come true, and we have to start asking the question, where's the energy going to come from? The net energy going to come from to fund that growth? And, punchline time, it just doesn't exist. And so the prediction I made years ago was that when we got into this net energy crunch, what we would see would be this mysterious breakdown in our economy. Like, wait, we're dumping trillions of dollars of stimulus in, but where's the jobs? Wait a minute, where's the actual growth? Hold it. Debts are still going bad, and they're deflating, and they're blowing up on us, but we're shoveling all this money, and why is that happening? It's deeply confusing if you don't have any understanding of the energy E. All you're doing is running your system as like Bernanke does, like the ECB does. These are people who grew up with 40 years of training under them that all say all you need to understand is the economic E. You put money in, you lower interest rates. Yes, it's a complex system. It's a little bit unpredictable, but generally speaking, if we reduce the price of money, people will go out and use that money and create growth from that. And that hasn't been happening. That's the tapestry that we're in. That's the land by which, that's how when I open the newspaper and I see what's working and what's not working, it makes a lot more sense to me because I have this view of energy and its role in this story than I think it might to somebody who just is wondering, why the old policies don't seem to be working and why we can't seem to, get this working anymore.
I agree. I think that's the defining realization that truly for the first time in a long time says that this time really is different.
Dangerous words, those, but it might be, and that's what I'm asking people to consider.
Yeah, even if they get the economic stuff squared away by some measure, to get back on that growth curve, the way I put it is you're running into a glass ceiling with that law of diminishing returns, and it's exactly what you've just been sharing. So given the soundness of that argument or story, which I agree completely with, you then have to start looking at, well, how is the future going to be different? And how, from a financial perspective, do I adjust my strategies to a very different looking world? and that's what I'm so looking forward to finding out or hearing your